Thanks for coming out today and to hear our forum. This theme is with a record number of homeless families in motels and a housing shortage. What can we do? We'll certainly hear ideas from our speakers today. We thank all of the co-sponsors of the forum, which are UMass Action Network, Mass Coalition for Homeless, Citizens Housing and Preservation Association, and Advocacy City Mission. We especially thank our sponsors with us for all these years, Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries. And we also note that there are congregations, community organizations, and schools from 35 of them from 16 towns as supporters of the forum, and we thank all of them. And we thank all the organizations. We're going to be at tables today, the Concord Homelessness and housing organizations, and at the end of the talks you'll have a chance to meet them and discuss what they do, what their goals are. My name is Carl Miller. I'm coordinator of the Advocacy Network to End Family Homelessness. And our mission is to work to end family homelessness by public education and advocacy. And your advocacy does make a difference. Your voices to your legislator do make them put your issues among our priority issues when it comes time for a vote or for urging the leaders of the legislature to adopt those issues. I would like to continue in the welcoming by having Whitney Retallick, the Executive Director of Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries, give a social justice welcoming. Whitney?
Thank you, Carl. Greetings and welcome to the 10th Annual Concord Forum hosted by the Advocacy Network to End Family Homelessness. Many times when an announcement is made of the 10th anniversary of something, it denotes a celebration, whether it's a landmark that indicates the successful survival of something for a decade, or the ongoing marriage of two or more things, or years past since achieving some great accomplishment. But the anniversary we are marking today is not the kind of anniversary you want to celebrate necessarily. In this case, we are certainly honoring the commitment and hard work of Carl and others in the Advocacy Network for the past 10 years. In those 10 years, they have worked tirelessly and have brought thousands of people together to become more educated about the causes and effects of family homelessness and to advocate for solutions. Yet we don't wish for another 10 years of forums, since the sincere hope is that in 10 years, solutions will have triumphed. The actions that we take as a result of today will determine in great part whether we will be back here in 10 years talking about the continuing plight of homeless families in the state, or if we will be gathering to celebrate the success of strategies that we have the opportunity to support now. Thank you for being here today to learn more about what we all can do, individually and collectively, to address the persistent problem of family homelessness in Massachusetts. Thank you for being here now so we might be able to come together in 10 years to celebrate. Thanks to Reverend Lombard and Trinitarian Congregational for hosting this and previous forums. TriCon is where it all started with the Advocacy Network to End Family Homelessness, and their conviction and commitment to this cause has not let up. We appreciate their open doors and their open hearts. Thanks to all the presenters for providing us with context and information we need to effectively advocate for solutions. Thanks to all the legislators who join us today, as we know their partnership is crucial. CMM, Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries, is in its 48th year, and bringing people together from different faith groups to address issues of housing and homelessness has been part of its fabric since the beginning. I've now been with CMM for a year, and working with the Advocacy Network has been an inspiring part of this work. The Advocacy Network coordinators care so deeply about eradicating family homelessness. Their motivation to this issue implores all of us to think about what more each of us can do in this effort. Our board of directors met in January to identify some priority areas of action for CMM for this upcoming year. The issue of housing and homelessness was effortlessly identified as one of those critical areas on which we want to focus. Working with the Advocacy Network and others, please stop by the CMM table, see me later, to talk about how CMM can work with you from wherever you are coming today in working to end family homelessness in Massachusetts. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Whitney. I'd like to have Reverend John Lombard, our Senior Minister of Trinitarian Congregational, give a faith message and welcome. John?
Thank you, Carl. Excuse me, I'm not as thin as I used to be. On behalf of the members and friends of Trinitarian Congregational Church, I want to welcome all of you here today. I need to start out with a brief word of apologies. We have no heat in this building. We do in a couple wings, and we won't have any heat here until probably June. But just remember how fortunate you still are in an unheated building than all the people that we are concerned with today. So there are graces in even small things in this place. So on behalf of the members and friends of this church, I want to welcome you. We have always been very pleased to be associated with and work with people like Carl and the coordinating committee, because core to our tradition, and I'm not sure our faith tradition is terribly different when you peel back the layers from many others, but core to our tradition is a compelling social justice ethic, an imperative which is coupled with constant and consistent acts of works of mercy. So when you combine those things, it is a natural that this topic and this urgent and compelling need is certainly a focus for our work here, and we're appreciative of Carl and his committee and all the other organizations, our legislators, and people like Whitney. Whitney and I were talking before this event, and we said, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to be here today? That we had the problem solved, and we had found a way to be clear in terms of meeting human need. So, we have a compelling social justice ethic, and that's what drives us, whether it's with the hungry and the homeless, the least, lost, and loneliest, whether it's the marginalized and alienated, the helpless, hopeless, and hurt, whether it's the prisoner, the stranger, the alienated and the isolated, whether it's the loveless or unloved. This is part of what we're about in responding and healing in holistic ways. So that's what drives us. I do want to share one very brief autobiographical piece, because my first exposure to homelessness with a face on it was back in the early 1980s. I can't believe that all these years later, we are still struggling with providing adequate shelter for people in need. I served in a community known as Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and there was an Episcopal priest there and myself who received many people coming through our parish who needed material assistance and shelter. And we realized early on in the game that with our limited resources and the increasing demands, that we simply couldn't find our way clear as to how we were going to manage all of this. So we sought out some allies, and one of the allies was a state legislator who happened to run a sandwich shop in downtown Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He literally provided food for anyone who came through his doors in need at no cost to those people in need. So between this wonderfully generous legislator and entrepreneur and my friend the Episcopal priest and myself, we decided that we needed to pull together a network of people. You all know the old saw, it takes a village to raise a child. We believed that it took a village to address the homeless situation in our community. So we reached out with our shared interest and concern and limited resources. We found a local businessman, very well respected, was an entrepreneur, had a lot of low-income housing that he had developed, and we won him over. We had a wonderful couple who ran one of the premier old-fashioned hotels, the Wentworth by the Sea. It's one of 3 classic institutions still alive, 2 of them currently functioning. These wonderful people, we won them over in their hearts, and they gave us the kind of dedication and hospitality that you could never imagine. We identified and rehabbed a city building, and our sole purpose was to bring people in off the street. That was it. It was the only thing we were committed doing, so they wouldn't have to be out on these awful cold and freezing and miserable days. That soon led to a board being formed, some funds being raised, and in the early 1980s, we purchased a 1950s motel on Route 1 in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We added a 4-plex to it, and there was a warehouse next to it which supplied clothing and food and all kinds of material needs. And we set out to create something which remains this day as a much-needed help in that seacoast area. We provided 3 levels of care: emergency, overnight, transient, in terms of probably several weeks where people could stabilize. And we provided for families in this new 4-plex that we built. About 2 years after this, we had a big philosophical discussion in our board, and it was, is this all we're doing? Providing a roof over people's heads. And we decided it was not enough. It was a Band-Aid. We decided we needed to put a floor under the feet of these people so they could get some traction and truly a new life. And so we brought in a network of people. We had social workers, we had professionals, doctors, we had addiction services. We provided transportation so people could find jobs, child care for single parents who needed children taken care of while they interviewed for jobs. It was one of the most incredibly transformative times in my life in ministry. And that organization, both fortunately and unfortunately, continues to serve the seacoast of New Hampshire in incredibly wonderful ways. I wish I had a better story to tell that they went out of business, but they didn't. They didn't. They continue to thrive and provide much-needed service to all these great people. So I want to just say thank you to all of you, all the organizations, our legislators, everyone who is working together as part of this village to address homelessness in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I can't think of time being better spent by all of us. So thank you for being here. Welcome. And there's a bathroom to this door to the left. Downstairs, these stairs, there are a ladies' room at the bottom and men's rooms to the left. Thank you for coming.
Next, I'd like to ask Frank Austin of the steering committee to come and give an overview of the forum. And Frank has done a lot of the planning of this forum, and we thank him for that. Frank Austin.
Thank you, Carl. It's been my privilege to be part of this, and for the past 10 years. And I would just like to briefly say that this being the Advocacy Network to End Family Homelessness, and this being our 10th forum, the good news is that we're here after 10 years. The bad news is we haven't achieved our goal. But hopefully that's on the horizon. Certainly seeing you all here and with our representatives and Aaron Gorenstein for the agency and our advocacy groups, there is great hope for this. So today we're going to learn more about homelessness, particularly as it currently exists. As the information indicates, it's not getting any better, and the severity of this problem and its impacts on families and on children as well. We've heard in the past some very compelling talks about health effects on children. So what our Commonwealth has done to help with service and housing options is an important issue for us, for low-income families, and the record number of homeless families we have now in Massachusetts, both in shelter and in motels. Then we'll discuss how you and I, through our advocacy to our legislators, can help this. I'd like to quickly ask for a show of hands. It's important for us to know basically what the makeup of our group is. How many people have been here in the past for any one of our past forums? So that looks like about a third of us. This is about what we expected. It helps us to decide what the balance should be between ongoing information and new. And before we proceed, I'd also like to recognize the legislators who, in addition to our speakers, are here with us today. First, I'd like to call to your attention Representative Corey Atkins from the 4th Middlesex District. She's the chair of the Joint Committee on Tourism, Arts, and Cultural Development. And next to her is Representative Jen Benson from the 37th Middlesex District. Jen is the Joint Chair on Healthcare Finance, a very important issue. And right in front of us, an old friend, and we've seen several times here, Representative Jay Kaufman from the 15th Middlesex District. He's the chair on the Joint Committee on Revenue, another very, very important issue for us. So thank you for your attendance here. We know some have to leave, and we understand that, but we appreciate your being here. And we hope you find this informative and supportive to your work for us. As our keynote speaker today, we are pleased to have Mr. Aaron Gornstein, Undersecretary of the Department of Housing and Community Development. He has an undergraduate degree from the University of Wisconsin, graduate degree from Tufts University, Department of Urban and Environmental Policy, received many local and national awards and fellowships for his work in advancing affordable housing and community development initiatives, and has served on numerous local and national advisory boards and commissions. Mr. Gornstein has served as a neighborhood planner for the City of Cambridge and the Director of Housing for the Tri-City Community Action Program in Malden. He served as the Executive Director of Citizens Housing and Planning Association, CHAPA, from 1990 to January of 2012, and was then appointed by Governor Patrick to serve as the Undersecretary for Housing and Community Development effective January 31st of 2012. In this position, he oversees the department, which administers nearly $1 billion in state and federal funds for a variety of programs for emergency assistance, affordable housing production, community development, rental assistance, public housing, and others serving the Commonwealth's homeless population. In 2013, Undersecretary Gornstein was also appointed Chairman of the Interagency Council on Housing and Homelessness for the Commonwealth. Today, he's going to discuss for us the challenges that we face in the current crisis in family homelessness. So please welcome Aaron Gornstein, our Undersecretary of the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, and good afternoon. Thanks for the great turnout, for the interest that you've shown to be here and spend your Sunday afternoon talking about this critical topic. And thank you, Frank, for inviting me. And to Carl Miller, Reverend Lombard, and especially the Advocacy Network, who's pulled this together for 10 years in a row. Congratulations to the Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries. I worked very closely with them at CHAPA for all the years I was there. So I really appreciate all the work, the great work that you're doing, and to all the elected officials who are here, particularly those who will be on the panel following me, Senator Eldridge and Representative Gordon, and then Kelly Turley, who's just done an amazing job at the Mass Coalition for the Homeless, and you'll be hearing from her. So this afternoon, I would like to spend some time highlighting the action steps that we're taking to address family homelessness in Massachusetts. After experiencing a 30% decrease in family homelessness about a year ago, the number of families entering the shelter system increased by 70% this summer and fall. Approximately 2,500 families entered our shelter system from July through October, which is a record number in that short period of time. To give you some perspective on the magnitude of the challenge, our shelter system accommodates about 2,000 families, all of which were full at the time that this increase was happening in the summer and fall. So you can see the dilemma. But our state's not alone. There are many other metro areas and states that are experiencing sharp increases in family homelessness just around that same time. You may have read stories in the New York Times and the Washington Post about New York City and Washington, D.C., and I've gone to various national meetings. I know Kelly has. We're hearing the same thing. This is not unique to Massachusetts or to Metro Boston. There are many factors that may explain the recent increase. Some include expected seasonal fluctuation corresponding to the end and the beginning of the school year. In other words, we tend to see an increase over the summer months. That's counterintuitive to some people. You may think we experience increase over the winter months. It's over the summer months for the families. There are rising rents and a shortage of affordable apartments. You know that all too well. Average rent is about $1,600 a month. We're the third highest metro area in the country. We've had increasing poverty rates and inequalities in the economy, both of which Governor Patrick and President Obama have spoken about frequently, particularly in recent months. Families who have been doubling up but have exhausted their housing options then come into our shelter system. That's the largest category of families that we see. It's families moving around frequently and they have nowhere else to go, and then they come to one of our 20 local offices to apply for shelter. And then finally, federal budget cuts. Cuts to the federal Section 8 rental assistance program have been devastating. For the first time in memory, and I've been in the field 30 years, the program has been frozen for nearly 1 year across our entire state, meaning no new Section 8 vouchers have been issued to any families. This has been a key strategy for families to be able to leave shelter by applying for a Section 8 voucher at one of their local housing authorities or through our program. That is not an option right now. Well, to tackle these challenges head on, we've adopted a comprehensive approach to reducing family homelessness and have engaged other state agencies and our local partners in the effort. And let me go through very quickly what our strategy and plan has been. And I would love to get your feedback on that because we're always open to other ideas. But it includes 3 elements. The first is homeless prevention. The second is creating more permanent, affordable housing. And the third is providing a range of support services to families so they can achieve greater economic self-sufficiency. Let me talk about prevention. This is our first priority, is to prevent homelessness and help families avoid entering the shelter system. It's not only better for the families, it's better and more cost-effective for the taxpayers. The RAFT program, which is, I know, mentioned on the flyer, and the home-based program are valuable tools in this regard, so we hope to have your support for those 2 programs. Under the expanded RAFT program in fiscal year 13, we prevented over 3,000 families from becoming homeless, and we also prevented an additional 1,000 families from avoiding the shelter system through home-based diversion and through other efforts that we've undertaken with the Department of Children and Families. So without these prevention tools, the situation would be even worse. So we have to keep focusing on prevention. Number 2, we need to expand the supply of permanent affordable housing, and I know you know that. We have focused extensively on creating new permanent housing for low and moderate income families. And I would have to say, and I know a lot about what's going on in the other states, Massachusetts has done more on affordable housing than any state in the country, bar none. Some point to California as having more progressive housing policies, but they cut their housing budgets by 79% over the past 2 years. Well, in contrast, since 2009, the Patrick administration, working in partnership with our legislature, has directed over $700 million in federal and state resources to expanding affordable housing and creating jobs and revitalizing neighborhoods. These investments have generated more than 12,000 affordable homes, including 3,000 last year, which is one of the highest numbers we've created in a given year. And an increasing portion of those are directed and targeted to the lowest income households. That's what we're trying to do. That includes homeless families, veterans, seniors, and people with disabilities. And I'm pleased to say that the governor, and this corresponds to when I came to DHCD, increased the capital budget by $40 million for our programs. And so I've appreciated the fact that when I've gone to him and asked for additional funding, given the crisis that we're in, and he has responded. And we're, again, using that $40 million to house some of the lowest income families. That's the most challenging thing to do, and it actually costs the most, as you might imagine. Another valuable tool is the Mass Rental Voucher Program, or MRVP, which helps families pay rent in private apartments. Again, in partnership with the legislature, the governor's expanded the program over the past 2 years from $36 million to $57.5 million. This has enabled us to help more than 2,000 families with mobile rental vouchers. In addition, we've committed 750 project-based vouchers to developers of affordable housing so we can increase our housing stock. Taken together, it's the first expansion of the state rental assistance program in 24 years. Besides creating new affordable housing, we've also made investments to preserve and revitalize our state public housing and our privately owned subsidized housing. We're one of the few states in the country that has state public housing, 46,000 units for seniors and families and people with disabilities. And we've been putting in about $100 million a year to modernize state public housing. And more recently, trying to bring on every available vacant unit in state public housing so that we can serve families, homeless families, and those off the waiting list. And we'd be able to do that for 400 units just in the past 2 years, and we just funded an additional 100 units. So we're trying to make maximum use of our state public housing. And then in 2010, the legislature passed a landmark bill to preserve existing subsidized housing, referred to as 40T. Since that time, our state investments have aided in the preservation of 13,000 apartments in privately owned housing, most of which would have been lost and converted to market rate housing. Some of you in the housing field know this as the expiring use problem. Well, we've made huge progress in holding on to those units. And I wanted to mention one last initiative. I had asked last year private owners of subsidized housing to step forward to offer their homes and their apartments to families coming out of shelter. They got together and organized and started the New Lease program for homeless families, which they launched in October, strictly volunteer effort on their part, to make roughly 1 out of 3 apartments available for our families coming out of shelter. They've set a goal of serving approximately 200 homeless families each year. Those are the kinds of things we have to do creatively, because we're not going to be able to build enough quickly enough. We have to capture the existing units we do have, and it's a good example of the leadership that we have here in Massachusetts among the private sector. People who say people don't care, it's just not true. There are many private owners who care deeply and are stepping up. The third area I want to focus on is the need for supportive services so that families can achieve success. Many families who've experienced homelessness need services to help them maintain a stable housing situation. So in 2013, last year, we committed to creating 1,000 units of supportive housing for low-income households over the next 3 years. And during the first year, we awarded funds for 600 units of supportive housing. And this month, we're going to be announcing the creation of an additional 300 units. So after 15 months, we're going to be very close to reaching our 1,000-unit goal. But we're not going to stop there, because I believe that permanent supportive housing is a key part of the solution. We've been able to use the new Housing Preservation and Stabilization Trust Fund that the legislature and the governor have provided to our agency. So this is going to continue to be a high priority going forward. Another initiative is around job training and employment. Working in partnership with the Fireman Foundation and the regional employment boards, we launched something called the Secure Jobs Program just about a year ago, so that we can help families in our emergency assistance program to obtain jobs, childcare, and transportation. Those are the three key components of what helps families. It's not just the job, but you need the childcare and transportation along with that. In just over a year, we've been able to help nearly 500 families obtain employment under this program. So I consider that to be a tremendous success, one that we need to expand. Therefore, we're going out and offering additional funding to expand in other regions of the state and to help our homeless families and those at risk with linking up directly to employment. Again, I think most people would agree that's a key part of what we need to do. So those are the three overall strategies. There's a lot of other detail, but I'm just trying to highlight a few examples. But even as we aggressively pursue these strategies, we know that we must ensure a strong safety net of emergency shelter for those who need it. Under our state mandate, we're often called a right to shelter state, we are obligated at DHCD to provide emergency shelter for every family that is eligible, whether there's space in our regular shelter system or not. We're the only state in the country with such a mandate. Think about it like an emergency room in a hospital. If an eligible family comes to our door, we must place them immediately and respond that same day. It's impossible to determine how many families may arrive on a given day, a given week, or in a given month. It tends to fluctuate. One day we could have 40 families throughout our 20 offices come in and become eligible. The next day it could be 15. There's really no way, to be honest with you, to plan for that. We have to respond to the emergencies, just like in a hospital emergency room. The hospitals can't determine how many people are going to get sick or in accidents on any given day. That's how our shelter system operates. We use hotels and motels as a last resort only when our shelter system is full, which has been the case for the past several years. Every administration over the past 30 years has had to rely on motels as an overflow system at certain points in time. Some of the coverage I see makes it seem as if this is just happening. This is a recent phenomenon. Those of you who have been around a long time know that over 3 decades, I started in the housing field at TRICAP 1984. We had to place families in motels. So this is not a new issue, but it's something that seems to be getting more persistent and worse. In other states, when the shelters are full or funding runs out, families are sent away. That's why you hear about families in other states sleeping in campgrounds or in cars or on the streets, and you really don't see that here in Massachusetts, fortunately. And I have to tell you, many state governments have absolutely no involvement at all in the emergency shelter system. It's all left up to city and county governments to bear the responsibility. Here in Massachusetts, we don't do that. To help families in shelter, the home-based program I mentioned earlier provides up to $4,000 to help make the transition from shelter to permanent housing. Since July of 2013, we've helped about 3,200 families make that transition. I consider that's helping thousands of families over the course of many months to get back on their feet, back into the community, into permanent housing. And then once they're placed, once they found an apartment, under that program, we offer support services for up to a full 12 months, again, so we can maintain a stable tenancy. We're not walking away from the family, but there's a case manager who's working with that family throughout the year after placement. In January, we supplemented this $4,000 of assistance with $2,000 for a total of $6,000 per family to make this transition. At the same time, we implemented a new policy so that if families, maybe it doesn't work out for them, they can come back into shelter within 3 months instead of the former policy of 12 months. So many families were afraid to take the risk. Providers were in a moral dilemma. I can't have that family go into apartment if I know they can't come back into shelter. Now they can. So with the combination of those two things, we've seen a 24% increase in exits from shelter using home-based just since January. So I'd say that's working. There was skepticism about it and when we were offering it, but I think it's helping a lot of families. We also believe it's time to resize the shelter system to take into account the new caseload I described earlier, so we're less reliant on the motels. Towards that end, we're increasing the congregate shelter system by 650 units, all of which will be online by the end of this month. We've been working on this since the fall. All 650 by the end of March. The governor's requested funding in the FY15 budget for an additional 1,000 beds that would be available by the end of this year. Everyone will agree that housing families in motels on a temporary basis does not provide the proper living situation for families to succeed. We're concerned that the school-age children residing in the motels don't have the same or comparable environment to learn. Just doing homework is difficult. Getting to and from school, concentrating on your studies. These are all difficult for families and children in the motel, for the children in the motels. In addition, because the motels don't have kitchens, it's a significant challenge to the parents to provide healthy food options. Transportation's difficult because of the location of the motels. Access to regular health care can be challenging. Housing families at motels also puts a strain on the local community and school budgets. This is what we're hearing certainly throughout the state. I'm sure Rep. Gordon will talk a little bit more about this. In contrast, the congregate units tend to be located in larger homes in typical neighborhoods. Each family has their own bedroom, but they share a large kitchen and bathrooms with other families. The homes are located near amenities typically, stores, public transportation, recreational facilities. Another important difference between the motels and congregate shelters is these shelters are staffed 24 hours a day and provide extensive case management services to the families, focusing on helping families to stabilize, but then to move into permanent housing. A range of different services that the families were really not able to do out in the motels. So, while we're expanding the congregate model, which I hope you will support, no one likes to expand shelter, but we're faced with this conundrum that we must respond to the crisis while we're working on longer-term and medium-term solutions. And I would much rather have the families in our congregate shelter system than in motels. So while we're expanding that model, we've greatly increased our support to the families in the motels. Along with the Department of Public Health and DCF and our regional service providers, we're now sending teams of professionals in to engage directly with the families. We increased our funding for the regional housing agencies, such as the Metropolitan Boston Housing Partnership, which serves this area. Every single family has a case manager now. DPH, DCF are going out in every single motel. We're also working more collaboratively with the municipalities and coordinating with elected officials, school departments, and volunteer organizations that are trying to do the best they can to help the families. And these volunteer groups have been crucial. We worked closely with Representative Gordon on the issue of Bedford And I know some of you who've been working in the motels are here today, and we just greatly appreciate all that you're doing in terms of the outreach to the families. We see that happening in other cities and towns around the Commonwealth. Very heartening to see people really step up. But they need the state to sort of help coordinate oftentimes, whether it's for medical care, and we have volunteer doctors and nurses going out, et cetera. So it really is what Bedford has done, and now in Marlborough, and we see it in Shrewsbury and Leominster, really all over the state. It has been very, very helpful. So let me just finish up, because I know I've probably gone over my time, but well, despite our best efforts, and I've outlined for you what those are, our best thinking, you know, the advice that I've been getting and then our department has been getting, and all the unprecedented state investments from the legislature and the governor, we still have far too many families in the motels. And that's why you're here this afternoon. And we have so much more work to do. But I think there's some signs that I can see that the strategies that we've talked about are beginning to take hold. So don't get too discouraged. We need to be patient and persistent. Since December, the number of families in the motels has dropped by nearly 10%. I think it's a combination of the new shelter units we brought on, the increased exits using home base and MRVP, the state rental assistance program, the new supportive housing that I've mentioned, stepping up our prevention and diversion efforts, and the leveling off of the caseload. All of that's helping. So there's no magic bullet. There's a combination, multiple strategies that we have to pursue aggressively, and I think it's starting to really help. On Friday night, the number of families in the motels was under 2,000. It's the lowest since September. So we're making progress, and now we really need to keep the momentum going. So the timing of this event is perfect, because to do that requires everyone working